I mean, it seems that we are, in some respect, dismissing our values for good policy. And I put that in brackets there.
Well, I think that there is a school of thought that says that the primary concern of Canada-China relations is the promotion of Canadian prosperity through engendering more trade and investment with the People's Republic of China and diversifying our dependence away from the United States. But I think that there's also a problem that the Chinese regime has had a very sophisticated engagement with people of influence in Canada. The Chinese Communist Party generously funds what they call the United Front Work Department, which is designed to create support for the goals of the Chinese regime domestically and internationally through cultivation of key influencers. And so I think that there's increasing awareness that there are people in positions of influence in Canada who have been the recipients of benefits from the Chinese regime. And so Australia has responded to this with their Foreign Influence Transparency Scheme Act, which requires current and former policymakers to register any benefits that they've received from a foreign power, so that if they are attempting to influence their government's policies in ways which favor the objectives of the Chinese regime, at least you'll know that that they seem to have a conflict here. And similarly, Canadian business, which has lucrative relationships with Chinese communist business networks, are not just dealing with their business partners, but they're dealing with the whole Chinese regime under the Chinese Communist Party. And there seems to be an expectation on the part of the Chinese embassy that those businesses will lobby our government to not take effective action against, say, Chinese cyber espionage or the pervasive issue of Chinese state harassment of persons of Chinese origin here in Canada, whether they're Canadian citizens or nationals of the People's Republic of China. They still deserve the protection of our Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And it seems that our government has a de facto policy of facilitating China's attempts to manipulate and, in many cases, menace people in Canada who would like to speak out against Chinese domestic behavior, as you say, the Uyghurs, the Tibetans, the Canadians of Hong Kong origin, China democracy activists here in Canada, all report severe interference by agents of the Chinese state. And if you look at the diplomatic list of Canada, there are far more diplomats in the People's Republic of China accredited to Canada than any other nation, including the United States. I mean, many multiples of the United Kingdom delegation. So the question is, what are those people doing? Are they engaging in activities that are not compatible with their diplomatic status? And why is it that our government isn't, declaring some of them persona non grata, or if the agents of the Chinese state active here in Canada don't enjoy diplomatic protection, making them accountable by arresting them and allowing them an opportunity to defend their activities in a court of law. We don't see any of that. There seems to be largely a passive and appeasing approach to the People's Republic of China, which further emboldens China to engage in these very disruptive activities like the hostage diplomacy. I mean, I think from the Chinese government point of view, holding Mr. Kovrig and Mr. Svaver for over 930 days under brutal incarceration is a policy which is working for them, because it seems to be cowing Canada into not standing up for our Canadian values in terms of Chinese malign influence in our country.
Right. And, that same tactic of incarceration, as you say, it was used by Xi Jinping himself to all the factions who were opposed to him. I mean, if I correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe still one of the main leaders of the opposition to him is still currently incarcerated in China. So this seems a very a tactic in their playbook. A tactic in their playbook, and they know how to use the as the quote, as the saying goes, strongman tactics. But I wonder too, like with respect to that, what do you see of policies, trade or just trade relation policies between Canada and China? What do you think that needs to be improved upon for better relations, for fostering into the future?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think in terms of your observation on the system, there's only been one peaceful transition of power in China. It was in 2002 between Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao, and so the rest of it does involve purges and arresting rivals on the basis that they are corrupt in some sort of way, engaged in other malfeasance. So that's the norm. It's, that's why we have this problem of Chinese Communist Party associated families investing so much money in Canadian real estate, particularly in Vancouver, because they want a bolt hole in case they find themselves on the wrong side of a factional dispute, because that if you get on the wrong side of a political issue in China, you lose everything. So they want to have their typically corruptly obtained gains, I think, safely invested abroad in their families with Canadian passports, so that they can be assured of some degree of future, if things turn south for them politically. I think that's really what we're talking about here, because, even if you look at Meng Wanzhou, the Huawei CFO, we know from the circumstances of her detainment that this lady owned 2 multi-million-dollar mansions in Vancouver and was carrying 7 passports at the time of her arrest. Well, why do you need 2 multi-million-dollar mansions in Vancouver? And does she have similar real estate holdings, say, in Australia? Or,
Right.
like it is a cause for concern that, it might be that some people, I don't know the circumstances of any of the specifics, or whether, and I certainly wouldn't want to accuse Ms. Meng of anything improper, but that, that some of this money may be of doubtful provenance. And,
Right.
There's a lot of suggestions about money laundering through casinos and murky relationships with Chinese triad gangs that import fentanyl, which is such a big scourge in our drug using community. And so there are a lot of things like that. I think in terms of your question as to trade, what we really have to do is to insist on reciprocal fair trade with mechanisms to ensure that there will be compliance with the terms of these agreements. So in other words, if it turns out that the trade is no longer suiting the Chinese regime's interests, they can't simply abandon the contract and nationalize the Canadian business in China, or seize assets, or in some cases, when there are trade disputes, the Canadian or other foreign national is arrested on some sort of spurious charge to get them to give up their assets as a condition for their being allowed to return to their home country. So, I mean, this kind of practice just doesn't work for us. Exactly. And we can't do it reciprocally. Canada detains the Huawei CFO, and China engages in various economic and political coercion measures. Well, we're not going to be picking up Chinese people off the street of Canada and throwing them into a dungeon. Just never going to happen, because our system just doesn't allow for that. So it's not reciprocal. And there's certain areas, like Chinese state desire to acquire Canadian natural resources and infrastructure to serve the interests of China's geostrategic purposes, that are not reciprocal. In other words, they can buy our mines. We can't. Under the Chinese constitution, foreigners cannot gain control of Chinese natural resources. And certainly we're never going to see any Canadian company being allowed to have participation in China's telecommunications network as they would like their companies to have in Canada.
Right.
So I think that we would have to be doing this in collaboration with like-minded powers to have a sufficient bulk to enforce these conditions, but we simply have to come up with means to ensure that trade is fair, reciprocal, transparent, and that the terms are enforceable. And if the Chinese regime, is not prepared to engage in economic interaction with us on that basis, then I think we have to decide to seek our markets elsewhere. In Canada, only 4% of our external trade goes to China. I think a lot of people are under the impression that we're highly dependent on the Chinese market.
Right.
It's not actually true. And nearly all of that are agricultural commodities and minerals, for which there is a world market. So in other words, if China, decides that for political reasons they won't purchase Canadian potash, say they want the Russian potash instead, it means that there will be a market made available for potash somewhere else. So I'm not saying that this is easy, but the consequences of not giving in to China's unreasonable terms are not disastrous for the Canadian economy.
Exactly.
We could adjust to it because of the nature of our economic relationship with China.